This is Devin with Writing Daily, the show that we talk about writing for writers, about being a better writer, writing more effectively, marketing yourself, promoting yourself, doing all the kind of fun stuff that writing terrifies us and fills us with love. Today, I have a special guest, David Rocklin, who is the writer of The Night Language, which is a beautifully written book. I have to admit that I am totally jealous. David, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. That was an incredibly gracious introduction. I appreciate that very much.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. And I think I want to read a little bit of a biography. I think the one that you sent is actually on the back of your book, which is David Rocklin is the author of The Luminist and the founding curator of Rorschach, a monthly reading series in Los Angeles. He was born and raised in Chicago and now lives in Los Angeles with his wife, daughters, and a 150-pound Great Dane who seriously needs to stay on his own bed. He currently is at work on his next novel, The Electric Love Song of, is it Fleischerberger?
Perfect. You are actually the first interviewer to get the name right.
I think when you're going German, I think you choose the second vowel. So I took a stab. Anyway, it's really wonderful to have you here, David.
Great to be here. Thank you.
One of the things that kind of comes to mind is we both have the same publisher. Mm-hmm. And before we both had the same publisher, I actually bothered you to say, hey, tell me about this publisher. And what was beautiful, we have common friends. And now I would like to say that we are friends, but at the time, I really didn't know you. You were willing to chat with me. You were willing to kind of just say, things that I should know as a writer. And so I am not only grateful that you're here, I'm just grateful for you and your kindness that you were willing to kind of go this extra mile. And so it's great to have you.
Thank you. I'm just grateful that you have found a cool publisher where I feel very much at home. They've been wonderful to me. I know your experience with your memoir, which is going to be gorgeous and it's going to be amazing. And I think you're going to have a good experience as well. And, I think part of this writing life that you and I share is the joy of putting a hand back to help somebody in the way that hopefully somebody did for us once. I mean, if we're not willing to do that, half of the writing experience of opening and closing that circle of sharing and communicating is lost. So it's like you're only hurting yourself when you don't hold a door open for someone as the door hopefully was held open for you. So totally my pleasure. It was great getting to know you. And the fact that now here we are sitting here, both of us, LA-based published writers, it's pretty damn cool.
I think it's really cool. I'm enthusiastic about it. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about Night Language, but before we do you mind if I ask how you got started? Like what possessed you? How did you get here?
I think I've been writing all my life. I was the quintessential outsider, preteen teenager who kept a journal full of notes on how nobody understood me and I was just a lone wolf in the world and the only thing I had was my writing, man. And that was kind of my beginning. It was my introduction to the fact that it's important to write every day, even if what you're writing is just dreck. And I think that's a good lesson for most of us to just sort of take in and make a part of our daily experience. If there's not a word that's usable, it doesn't matter. The act of writing is like the act of exercising. You're keeping yourself sharp so that you have that breakthrough day at some point. So the habit started for me early. The idea of understanding the world through writing, that my writing helped me make sense of things that otherwise didn't really come very clear to me. That started really early. I was very lucky to have an incredible English teacher when I was like in 4th grade. And she seemed to see something in me, writing wise. And so I remember vividly, she asked me to stay after class one day and I thought I was in trouble. And she said, I want you to read something. It's not for class. It's not for a grade. I just want you to read it. And then maybe tomorrow you'll tell me what you think. And she gave me a copy of the Shirley Jackson short story, The Lottery. And I went home and read it and had my mind blown by the fact that this story puts you in this sort of very quiet, serene, Mayberry RFD place, and then pulls it all out from under you in like a page and a half. And I just thought, this is, I didn't have the command of grammar at that point, but just, this is subversive. This is power, that a writer can do this, that it's not just simply, we went to the store one day and we bought milk, that writing could be this force of really just exquisite destruction. And that really appealed to me. And there was something about me that she knew it would. And I think that kind of set me on the path of writing, just because I was so admiring of what writing could accomplish in the right hands. And that's really where I started. I have my obligatory drawer full of just garbage that no one will ever see, because I like people, and why would I do that to them? And, there's never been a time in my life from that day that I haven't written about something.
So I too had that sort of like writing on the back of the cigarette box and pouring out my heart, and nobody understands me. And I think that's, for a lot of people, that's a very true experience. At what point did it turn from I'm going to be writing every day to I'm going to be a writer? I'm going to, attempt to make this sort of like a life work as part of who it is that I am. Right.
I think for a long time, the notion of writing in a professional way, and that's not just, like you and I, we now have sold. So yes, I think one would say, well, now you're a professional writer because you will make money at it. And this is now not just an avocation. This is actually a professional undertaking for which you will be professionally, traditionally published and paid. All of that stuff, those are part of the accoutrements of being a professional writer. But, part of it is also making peace with the fact that, I guess, the fact that it's really hard and it's daunting can no longer stop me from denying that I have to do it. Stepping over that threshold, I think, is when your professional writing life begins. Because at least for me, for the longest time, the idea of creating an entire novel, it just felt too expansive. Like I wouldn't know what to do with it. It just was too big. It was like trying to envision an ocean crossing by trying to imagine in my head the entirety of the ocean, as opposed to here's the dock and today we'll go about this far. And so eventually I came to a place, and it was when I moved from Chicago to Los Angeles back in the early 90s, that I realized, it's time not to have this excuse anymore. Yes, writing is hard. Yes, it's going to be daunting, but every single day you're thinking about doing it, so just do it. And once I made peace with that, I also realized that for me, I could not write if I stayed in the place where I'm from. I needed to be far from the place I grew up in, the roots of my life, in order to be able to see the things I wanted to see and write. Whether it was going to be about those things or just generally, I felt very strongly, in some odd instinctive way, I needed to move away from where I was from. And so the move from Chicago to LA is really what commenced the actively, I am trying to professionally write to put work out there phase.
And having done that now, how do you feel about it? Is it something that, you know what I mean? Like, is it worth it? Is, I guess, the bigger question, because I know that there's going to be a wide spectrum of people who watch and listen, and there's going to be some people who, like, they just totally get it. And there's other people who are like, well, but then what if I have to sacrifice it? And maybe it's just a terrible idea. And there's going to be a lot of what ifs. What's your experience, and what would you tell people?
Yeah, I would say that all the things that writers feel, it's all true, it's all real, and you're either going to be able to make friends with those feelings or you're not. It's a little bit like when you pick up yesterday's writing and it felt good at the time, but now you're looking at it and it just looks like one giant glob of purple prose and you're just ashamed. Make friends with that feeling, because no matter how many times you're published, it never goes away. Every time I start something new, I feel woefully unprepared and inadequate to the task. And it's a little bit like when you're boxing. You're going to get gassed. You're going to get exhausted. That's okay. Make friends with that feeling and know that there is an other side that you will get to where that feeling is gone and it's replaced by the feeling of satisfaction or by transcendence. The feeling is like everything else in life. It's ephemeral and temporary, and you will get through it to the other side. So is it worth it? For someone like me, and I'm guessing someone like you, where writing is how we make sense of life, the question of whether it's worth it almost doesn't come up. It's really more a question of how can I not? How can I let the day go by without doing something? It's just that integral a part of us. We have that kind of relentlessness, which you have to have in order to finish something, go through the process of publication and the process of rejection, which we all experience and will experience continually. It's worth it if the kind of life you are leading is the one that is dictated by the fact that writing is so important to me that I can't not do it. If writing is just something that you see as an avenue towards recognition or fame, then no, it's not going to be worth it for you. You have to be in love with the craft and the day-to-day. You got to love the grind. If you don't love that, then it's going to become so daunting that it might actually make you bitter towards self-expression, and no one should ever get to that place. You know, my little rant on this is, if you believe in your art, whatever that is, could be screenwriting, could be novel writing, memoir writing, painting, acting, whatever it is. If you believe in that form of expression, if you believe that that mode of communication is just an absolutely essential part of your life, then I would beg and plead with whoever might be watching or listening, structure your life around the protection of your ability to do that. If it means taking a slightly different job that gives you the flexibility to pursue it, do that. If it means giving up on, you know, the kind of insane number of relationships that leaves you no time to pursue it meaningfully, do that. If it means, in my case, move and go someplace where the perspective is fresh, where the connections are different, in order to really kind of get to that place that you want to get to write or to create, do that. You really do have to take that active step to protect and secure your ability throughout your life to do your art. Sustain yourself, get a job that pays your bills, create a life that allows you to pursue this so that nobody can take it away from you. Because if you write, in our case, only to sell, then eventually someone will have power over your art. They'll be able to tell you, hey, Devin, you know that memoir you're working on? Memoirs aren't selling, dude. What you need to do is put a girl on a train. That's what you need to do. Write that story. And if you're dependent on them for your income and you're dependent upon your art to survive, you'll bend to that pressure. And now it's lost. Or you won't be able to sell anything and you'll become bitter and angry. So yeah, it's hard. And you have to be resilient and you have to be relentless and be able to withstand criticism. But at least in my perspective, it's so worth it. I can't imagine not doing it. That would be a personal nightmare not to be able to do what you and I do.
You know, it's funny that you should mention that, you know, somebody coming up to you and saying, hey, you know, memoirs aren't selling, because that's precisely what happened. I mean, people told me that not only are memoirs not selling, that they're really hard to sell, and you should consider either writing something else or doing something else that is not memoir writing. So,
you know, it's like memoirs aren't selling until a memoir comes out and it sells. And then it's, oh my God, memoirs are hot. You know, we write what we have to write. We write what we need to know and we need to communicate to others. And the marketing and the commerce and the mercantilism of it, that's up to other people.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think at some point you take whatever action, but you try to kind of, like, the action isn't personal. Like, I'm doing whatever it is that I can do. I'm sure you're doing the same thing, where you're trying to put it out there, and at some point it's not personal. Do you know what I mean? It's an element to the bigger picture of what the job of writing is about. You know, like, in other words, you were grateful, or I'm grateful to have you here. And then we get to talk about what and how you do it. Speaking of which, you talked about the grind of writing. Do you have a particular kind of consistent way that you sort of like wake up the morning as David the writer?
Oh, that would be great if I did. I have, the structure of my life is writing and the reading series that I host and work and a family, including a young daughter. And so my only structure is that each day I will make sure I steal some time, but it's not a set time. My life just doesn't work that way. I try to steal some time each day. But the one thing I've also learned that I think a lot of writers, I would wish it upon them to learn it, is if the day comes and goes, and it's just one of those days, and you have not been able to write, please don't punish yourself. Please don't think about everybody's Instagram post and everybody's Twitter post, and it's like, I must write for an hour a day, and so-and-so has been writing from 9 to 5 because I saw her picture of her journal on a table with a cup of coffee and the sun is coming up and she just seems incredibly diligent and I'm a slacker. You know what? None of that stuff is necessarily real every single day for anyone. We do what we can do. We try to take cuts at it as best we can. If we have a full day to write, awesome. If we only can steal an hour, awesome. Every day you're chipping away at it. And even when we're not writing, we're writing. We're in our head, we're thinking about the story, we're thinking about what to do. Every day, if you're living the life, you're living the life. Go easy on yourself.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with you. So I kind of want to switch gears and talk a little bit about the night language. I've already said it's beautifully written. I mean, it's like you are a craftsman, my friend. Well done.
Honored. Thank you.
So for somebody, just to kind of give us a real basic summary, I could probably butcher it, but I think it would probably best come from you. What's the story about?
So the genesis of the story, as with my first novel, The Luminous, there's a kernel of fact. And then I took it and I just twisted the living hell out of it until it became the novel. The kernel of fact is that in the late 1860s, there was an emperor in Abyssinia. And he was a zealot Christian convert who perceived the Muslim-based countries around him to be essentially fomenting against him. So he sought help from Queen Victoria to send weaponry. She said no. And she had sent a delegation to say, no, we're not going to give you those weapons. So in a fit of pique, he took them hostage and held them hostage. England promptly invaded and just decimated Abyssinia, which is now Ethiopia. And in the doing, in actual life, he killed himself rather than be taken prisoner. And he left behind a son, who in actual life at the time was about 10 or 11 years old. The army took him and forcibly brought him back to England, where he became a ward of Queen Victoria. I discovered his story through the research I did for the first novel, which dealt with early age photography. And the woman who formed the basis of the character in The Luminist in life actually was the photographer who took his picture. And his picture was in the archives at the Getty. And so I discovered that photo and set it aside because at the time I was working on my first novel. But there was something so incredibly lonely and isolated about him, but at the same time resilient and strong and defiant. And I was just fascinated by the image of him. And it was a troubling image to the eyes of someone like you or I, because he's dressed in the way that a colonial would have expected an African to look. So it was a very uncomfortable picture to look at. He had lion's teeth and he was holding a spear, and it was very uncomfortable. But underneath it, the dignity of this kid was just very loud. And so when I came back to it, I discovered who he was and began to think about what happened in his actual life, and was really overcome with the need to write for him the life that he didn't get to live. And so it becomes a story of, and it's told essentially in two time periods. One is the dawn of the 20th century, when Queen Victoria is very near the end of her life. And the other is back in and around the late 1860s, early 1870s, when Alamayu, who's the name of the prince, was a ward of Queen Victoria. And it's a love story between two young black men, Alamayu and a young man named Philip, who was apprenticed to a surgeon aboard one of the warships. They meet on the way back from war, and they are the only ones like them on board the ship. They're certainly the only ones like each other at Queen Victoria's court. And they find that they're falling in love with each other, which at the time would not have been spoken aloud. And as they are discovering the depth of feeling for each other, racism and politics threaten to pull them apart, and actually threatened to send Alamayu back to Abyssinia, where he would certainly be killed. And so the story really becomes a story of what would you do for the love of your life? What would you be willing to do to save someone who you love that deeply?
I'll be honest with you, I'm sort of still reading it. It's a remarkable story.
Thank you.
Of course, one of the questions that comes to mind is, you are writing about, it's sort of like a gay story on one hand. It is a story of racism. There is elements of appropriation. Mm-hmm. And here you are as a white guy in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How, I mean, obviously from my perspective, I think you write the story that you are compelled to write because we are human. But mm-hmm. I'm assuming there might be a naysayer out there. How do you come to a place where you feel comfortable as a writer to explore these things that may not necessarily resonate with you specifically?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I've heard other writers tackle the issue of cultural appropriation, especially other writers who are of the quote-unquote dominant culture, which actually I think is no longer true, and I hope it's no longer true, but writers who are just simply heterosexual white writers like myself, when they get asked the question, well, you're writing about somebody who belongs to a culture that has classically been appropriated from by people just like you, so what right do you have to have created this story? And the way that they've answered the question has always really rankled me, because they almost take umbrage at the question. And I'm always thinking to myself, well, now you sound exactly like somebody who would appropriate, because you're like saying, how dare you ask me that question, you far too loud minority type person. And so I'm like, oh, you don't even understand how you sound. To me, the answer to the question, what right do I have to tell this story, is none. I have no right whatsoever to tell this story. What I do have is empathy, curiosity, and a strong, strong desire to find commonality and bridges between myself and people either in life or in my fiction that do not come from my background. To explore with respect, to do my homework, to do all the research I need to try to be as authentic as I can be. Because most of the time when we take offense at something we read or something we see, it may not necessarily because it's blatantly racist. It's lazy, and it relies on stereotypes because someone did not do their homework. They just simply relied on past representations without thinking about whether they're accurate, whether they're depthful, whether they were well thought out, whether they were inadvertently ignorant of the culture that the representation comes from. I wanted to be very cognizant of that and very respectful, while at the same time telling the story of flawed people, just like we all are, and create an environment that felt as real as possible. Interestingly, I didn't know that it was going to be a love story. The character of Philip did not exist in the first two drafts of the novel. He was a person aboard the ship in the second draft who simply is seen from across a room. And in the redrafting and the revision along the about the third draft, they began to find each other on the page, and I just got out of the way and just tried to let them develop. And what I realized was this was not a side character translator or a source of sympathy because their skin color is similar to each other's. There's a connection being formed. There's a yearning that seems not to be spoken. And so the love story really was unexpected to them and to me. And in that way, I sort of felt like, well, then this kind of is my story and your story and other people's stories too. Maybe there is a place in this story where I do fit. The idea of this is the love of my life. Hopefully we all have that feeling. So in an unexpected way, a story that had nothing to do with me turned out to have almost everything to do with me as well. I was able to find myself in it. And that's how I kind of felt like, well, maybe the story is becoming a little bit more universal than perhaps I even thought it would. And hopefully readers are finding that universality in it. So far from just reviews and feedback, it seems like they are, and I'm incredibly grateful for that.
Yeah, you did a wonderful job. And I think you hit on a really important point that I think writing at some point becomes an exploration. In my own work, even though like in my memoir, I know the story to some degree.
Right.
Like there's a certain element where it's like I can just take what I remembered from, when I was 9 years old and just say that was the end of it, but it's not the end of it. It's
No. Yeah.
I think the word laziness is important because I think it would be easy to just tell the story as I remember it without taking sort of without looking at my own part within that story. And
that part's going to change over time, right?
Absolutely.
The meaning you find in it 10 years ago when you recreate a moment with your father is not the meaning you'll find in it now. You'll find
Absolutely.
a different meaning or a more evolved, fully fleshed out meaning, or the meaning you'll find after you speak to other people who knew you when about the portrayal and pieces begin to fill in. The meaning will always evolve. That's, memoir's not reportage. It's not a court reporter transcript. It's every bit as evolving and organically alive. And to that, we owe responsibility of respect and not being lazy as any other kind of writing, for sure.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it. So in terms of your next book, how far along with that process are you going?
Well, I'm a Luddite, so everything's handwritten in the first draft. I really just like the tactile feel of pen to paper. I am probably about 400 pages in, and that's probably roughly halfway, maybe a little bit less. So it's going to be a stupid long book, but I've gone back to revise, which I normally don't do. I'll normally write, come hell or high water, I will write from beginning to end. But in this instance, the first 100 pages of the book, I came to realize did not belong to the character that they belong to. They belong to the main character who wasn't born yet. So I wanted to just go back and make sure that those pages belong to Fleischl, because it was really his story I was telling through his father. And I just realized I went down the wrong street. So I've gone back. The first 400 will now probably come out to less than half that length to get me to sort of the turning point. But I still have quite a long way to go. And I think it's a fun story. It's a different tone for me. It's a little more GARP-like in tone. I told my agent, once again, sort of the inciting event, that the little factual kernel that is at the heart of all my books so far. But when I told her what it was about, there was just this deafening silence on the phone. And then she said, "Oh my God, can you just not do one easy book for me? Is that just too much to ask?" And I'm like, "But let me tell you what happened, like what really happened, where this comes from." And then when I told her, she's like, "Oh, that's cool." So I have her blessing, so I feel good.
All right. Well, congratulations on the blessing.
You.
That is a good thing. So if you were, we talked a little bit about this. I don't know if I got the answer, but you had mentioned that, sometimes during the process of book submissions and getting an agent, sometimes they're not as kind as they would like to be. And because you sound like you've got your stuff together as a writer, and I love that. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you here. What can you tell us that story?
Yeah. Oh yeah, the worst rejection. I mean, we all get these, right? And we'll continue to, and it doesn't matter. It may not be from an agent or a publisher, but it'll be from readers. Where, there's going to be a review. There's going to be a comment made at a reading. There's always going to be rejection. It's just inherently a part of this life. And we accept that because once we create something and put it out there, it sort of doesn't belong to us anymore.
Yeah.
Now it's being interpreted through other eyes, and how they see it is kind of beyond our control. But in terms of the process of getting an agent, it is a process, no matter how strongly you feel about your work, it is rife with rejection. And for me, and I'll just put this out there, and then I just want you to marinate in it for a second, because it's really kind of astounding. I got a letter back from somebody it was something I wrote before the first one. And it was, wait for it, keep writing, but use cheaper paper. Yeah.
Wow.
Right? Right? So at first I was like, oh my God. But then I thought, kind of funny, kind of a little mean. Like, you must have been having a bad day, but your snark level was, 100%. But yeah, I mean, sort of like an incisive little scalpel wound of a rejection letter. Most of the time, the rejections that you get, I think as writers, we would all feel a little bit better, not so much if they're just gilded in glorious language, like, I love your characters, I love your story, I love everything you did. It's not right for my list, because that's just eminently frustrating. It's like, yeah, I totally understand it. I run, if I were running a business, I would want to find all the stuff that's gorgeous and then reject it, because that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for just muddy and disgusting. So clearly, it's so frustrating, because it's the treacly lack of sincerity to all the nice words just pisses us off. I think, as most writers feel, tell me what I should have done. Tell me what's wrong. What can I work on? What would have made it better in your eyes? You don't have to look at it again, but give me something to actually work on, as opposed to, thank you very much for the submission. It's not right for our list, but we wish you all the best. That's just not helpful. But that's what we're going to get most of the time.
That is what we're going to get most of the time.
Yeah.
So we're running a little bit low on time. I want to know a couple things. If you have a book or something that's inspired you to keep going, to keep writing, to keep doing this, do you have a favorite either writer or a favorite book that has really brought it home for you?
Sure. There's a lot of books where what I'm always looking for with anything I read, or really anything I see film-wise or music, is I need to see in it what it was that made them bleed to do it. If I can see what it was that caused them to go, I will not eat, sleep, or rest until this is done, I'm probably going to love it. If I can't see that, and I kind of quantify all of that as emotional generosity. It doesn't have to be just purpley prose, flowery, Cormac McCarthy is emotionally generous. He's also incredibly spare, but the emotions are honestly in it, and I'm going to be drawn to it. So in terms of novels that have made me feel that way, A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving, very much so. There's an author, Shang-Rai Lee, who wrote a book called A Gesture Life, which is very, very spare, but just beautiful and incredibly moving. Andrew Sean Greer, who actually just won the Pulitzer for his new novel, wrote a novel called The Confessions of Max Tivoli, which has diamonds on every single page. Anne Patchett, State of Wonder, is just a remarkable book, just a gorgeous, beautiful book. Writers that you and I both know, or that you will come to know, including some rare birders, Antonia Crane and her memoir Spent, Patrick O'Neill, Gun Needle Spoon.
Yeah, that was a great book.
David Kukoff, Bruce Ferber, Chip Jacobs, just extraordinary writers who just put their emotional generosity on the page, tell stories in a really crackling way, and just leave you feeling like you just spent time somewhere other than where you were. Those books just do it for me.
I hear you. And so, but getting back to you, so Night Language is doing well. I've seen some wonderful reviews, so I know people love it. I know sort of like on a personal level that the book is doing great. I saw you over at the publisher's booth at the book fair just recently. That was wonderful.
That was fun.
So where can people find the book, and where can they get in touch with you?
Yes, I would love to hear from anyone and everyone, whatever question they might have, anything they want to say. I respond to everything. You can find me on Facebook on my author page, just David Rocklin. You can find me you can send me an email, which would be drocklin2, so DROCKLIN, then the number 2 at Gmail. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram. You can catch me through the publisher. The book's available through Barnes & Noble, through Amazon. If you go on IndieBound, that's a wonderful website. If people don't know it, that'll direct them to the closest independent bookstore near them, and they will order the book for you. Or call me, I'll drive it over and maybe bring you some soup. I'm not adverse to that. But, you know, again, not to kind of proselytize on this, but, you know, writing is the beginning of a conversation, and then the receipt of the writing, and then the giving of how you felt having read it, that completes the conversation. It's a conversation that's really critical to me to have with anyone and everyone who would like to. So if you guys are out there, you want to reach out for anything, whether it's how do I find an agent, how do I find a publisher, I'll respond. Happy to hear from you.
I love that, David. And so let me know that we're doing a good thing here. Please consider hitting the like button or the wow button or some kind of a button here. Share it, all that kind of fun stuff. And absolutely make sure that you run out and you find The Night Language by David Rocklin. It is a wonderful read, and I am enjoying myself. So as always, this is Writing Daily. You can get in touch with David Rocklin through a whole slew of different ways, which I love that. And what's the name of your main website again?
My website is just under my name, davidrocklin.com. But probably the easiest way to catch me is just on Facebook.
I love that. That's really easy. So anyway, really easy, wonderful stuff. Get inspired. I hope you've loved what we've done today. We're going to keep doing it here with Writing Daily, because Writing Daily is the goal. It's our exercise to keep telling the stories that need to be read and heard. Anyway, thanks so much for joining us today, and I will see you guys again tomorrow. Thanks.